Hey, how's it going, everybody, and welcome back to the SFS channel. My name's Gavin, and today I've got some Week 5 fantasy football trade advice where I'm going to be breaking down a total of 10 players and letting you know whether I think you should buy, sell, or hold these fantasy options depending on which situation and how you're looking at these players from respective to your individual teams. I'll be letting you know how to handle these situations and approach them as fantasy football managers here in this week's round of games here. So without further ado, if you're new around here to the channel, drop down and click that subscribe button and turn the bell on so you can get access to all of our other fantasy content that we post throughout the week. Lineup advice, a lot more trade videos, waiver wire targets. We do all kinds of stuff, so you want to be here to be able to take advantage of that stuff and get all the information you need in an individual game, matchup, week, whatever the case might be. We're here to help you get those fantasy championships this season, and I want to be a super interactive asset and piece to the puzzle for your fantasy championships this year, so I'm happy to help you out and respond to comments and answer your questions however I can be of help to you down in the comment section below. So with that being said, let's not waste any more time. Let's hit that intro and get straight into our fantasy advice for trades in Week 5. Before we hop into my Week 5 trade advice, I want to take a quick second to share one of my favorite unique daily fantasy platforms for this NFL season. ThriveFantasy is a daily fantasy site and app that allows you to take a player prop betting angle to your daily fantasy sports as opposed to other traditional apps and websites out there where you're drafting your players based off of either a salary cap or having some sort of point multiplier. ThriveFantasy allows you to basically have a situation and you've got 20 total players in a given matchup. So in just a second here, I'll show you all my lineup and my picks for Thursday night's football matchup between the Los Angeles Rams and the Seattle Seahawks. But what you're going to have here is 20 different choices to choose either the over or the under on. You're then going to go through and pick 10 out of the 20 situations and circumstances that they give you access to pick from, and you're going to try and maximize your total point output based on your predictions for a given game. I'll quickly break down my lineup here for you all. So we've got Matthew Stafford under 293.5 passing yards, so essentially anything under 294 is going to be golden for us. My thought process here is you've got the Rams taking on the Seahawks, one of the worst rushing defenses in the league, so I think that might cater towards a more ground and pound approach. And then you'll see there, for the under that I selected, if that holds true and that is what plays out in Thursday night's game, I'm going to get 105 total points going towards my fantasy lineups point total. And at the end of the day, you obviously want to accumulate as many points as possible, and you earn those points through correctly predicting a situation. But obviously, the more likely something is to happen, the less points you're going to receive. So there is some incentives to taking some risky bets out there. Additionally, here, I'll go through the rest of my lineup very quickly. I've got Darrell Henderson over 60.5 rushing yards, going back to that weak Seattle rushing defense, and over half a rushing touchdown. So I think Darrell finds the end zone on the ground. I've got Cooper Kupp over 5.5 total receptions. He had a down week last week, but I think he bounces back here. Robert Woods over 60.5 receiving yards and over half a touchdown. Sean McVay wants to get him more involved in this offense, and I am still a believer. Van Jefferson over 48.5 receiving yards. I think he can get that done in just a couple of catches here, and that'll help cancel out some of my other situations if they don't hold true, such as that Stafford low passing yardage that I predicted at the top. Finally here, I'm going to skip over these ice picks, and I'll get back to those in just a second. I've got Chris Carson under 88.5 rushing yards. He's been banged up. I'm not too confident about him this week. I'll take DK Metcalf under 75.5 receiving yards. Jalen Ramsey should be following him all day, and I'll take Tyler Lockett, who seems to have a knack for making huge plays, to score a receiving touchdown in this one. I think that's a pretty comfortable bet for me. The Tyler Higbee and Russell Wilson's picks, you see there, they're called ice picks. Those are basically tiebreakers. So if there's an emergency, if there is obviously a tie at the end of the situation between the players who have entered this contest, those will then be used as the tiebreaker picks. So make sure to plan those accordingly. One more time, that's Thrive Fantasy. If you want to go check them out, their website will be linked in the description of today's video. And when you deposit, use code SIZZLE, SIZZLE, for a deposit match of $10 or more, all the way up to $100 for new customers when you're creating your account. Go check out the games. See my picks, make your own, see if you can beat me this week, and I'll see you guys for Thrive Fantasy in some of our other primetime games this week. Alrighty, one more time, Thrive Fantasy. The link to their website is in the description of today's video, and use that promo code SIZZLE to get your deposit match. $10 or more all the way up to $100. You can get yourself a bunch of free cash to use on their site for weekly games. Chase Edmonds is the first player I want to talk about in today's episode. So we've got a lot of middle of the pack players, a few high profile names on the list, and then some other players that I think are high upside long shots here that can be of use to your lineups this season. So Chase Edmonds, the first name I'll break down. I'm going to buy Chase Edmonds this week. And you might be thinking, that might be a little bit counterintuitive here. 120 yards rushing on just 12 carries this past week in week 4. And he had a very nice outing. But I think the situation here is I see a lot of high upside play from him in full PPR formats. He's got 4+ targets every single week this year so far through the first month of the season. That's very telling to me. He's hauling in a lot of these passes too. That gives you extra boosted production that other players just aren't giving you. And I think he's the perfect fit for how this Cardinals team approaches every week. The air raid system, Kyler Murray getting out of the pocket, moving around, and then passing the ball to Chase Edmonds has become a very productive way to go out there and accumulate fantasy points. So that passing production, the efficiency he gives you on a per-touch basis, there's a really quality RB2 element to this situation here that I think he can continue to thrive in and be a consistent asset for us week in and week out, despite the fact that James Conner has a very prominent role on this team as well. And with that being said, James Conner is the next player up that I'm going to talk about today. If you've got James Conner on your fantasy roster, I'm going to sell him here. James Conner has very inflated numbers right now. 4 touchdowns in the last 2 weeks has really boosted him up there and really ramped up the point production that you see next to his name in your fantasy game logs. His yardage and efficiency production has not been where you want it to be at. 29 rushing attempts, and that's not even including his passing work, which, again, he has very limited passing involvement because Chase Edmonds is that player for this offense. 29 rushing attempts, 93 yards. You take out those touchdowns, you're looking at less than 5 points of fantasy production from those carries per week. So that's not very good. That's not what you want to see. He has shown you he can score touchdowns. That usage is not going away. As long as James Conner is healthy, he will be this team's short yardage back. But what I fear for is when Kyler Murray decides to pull that football and run the read option and take it himself, call his own number. We've even seen it already this year in week 1 where he faked the give to James Conner, boots out back to the left side of the end zone and scores a touchdown. He will do that. He led the NFL quarterback position in rushing touchdowns in 2020. So James Conner has a very real utility to his NFL team, but his actual efficiency and yardage production that he's giving you is not all that great. So maybe you want to hang on to him if you're in a standard league here, but this touchdown inflation is going to go away, and he's not going to be able to consistently score this many touchdowns every week, because if he did, he'd have like 30 at the end of the year, and that's something that very few players will ever have the opportunity or privilege to say that they've done so. So James Conner, recognize where your points are coming from here. I'm getting a variety of rushing and passing attempts from Chase Edmonds. James Conner is almost exclusively scoring me his points through the goal line. That's not sustainable production. You want to move off of that as soon as possible. Miles Sanders. I am going to hold Miles Sanders if I am an owner, which I am not personally, but obviously in every league out there, someone's got Miles Sanders on their team. He's been frustrating. It's been very underwhelming. I understand your pain. I was a huge Miles Sanders go-getter last season. His talent just flashes off the screen. But man, Nick Sirianni must have a rock inside his head, because you'd think that he would want to try and ball control, use his powerful offensive linemen, and control the game clock. But that's not what he does, because we love the Philadelphia Eagles, don't we? He decides that he wants to drop back and try and have Jalen Hurts have the number 1 statistical production in every quarterback passing category, despite his team winning very few NFL games. Makes a lot of sense to me. Well, for fantasy purposes, we're left with a bunch of duds here. 10 total touches for running backs in week 4 is an absolute joke to me for this Eagles team against the Chiefs. They should have known going into that matchup, you can't get into a shootout. That is the worst situation for your team. Guess what they did? They went out there and they passed the ball ad nauseum, and Miles Sanders does not produce for their team. So I don't know what to do here if you're a Miles Sanders owner other than hold him. He doesn't have enough value to salvage him and get a realistic trade for him in the market. You're going to want to hang on to him here. Last season, he had 3 massive production games against the Saints, the Ravens, and the Steelers, just from having one explosive carry. If he gets out there and gets the job done, his talent can take over at a point and he can produce numbers for you. You just got to be patient here. I know it's a dreadful process waiting for Miles to try and give you consistent numbers, and that's not going to be something that happens this season. If you get one game, try and flip him. Honestly, the hold for me in this situation is more so less expecting that you're going to be able to find a quality offer for him and encouraging you to keep him to try and salvage him for something later. So if there is a situation that arises, I'm absolutely selling Miles Sanders, but if you can't get that deal done, I'm looking to move off him and pursue a different avenue. Clyde Edwards-Helaire. This is the first sell in today's video. CEH is a player who I think has very great skills and intangibles to be a productive fantasy scorer. But even with back-to-back impressive games here, I'm still a little bit concerned about where his production is coming from. 14 rushes and 17 rushes in the last 2 weeks looks nice on paper. Again, 100 yards rushing in those 2 games. But the actual boom performances is coming from touchdown production, which is not something I have penciled in for Clyde as a long-term staple in his fantasy projection and profile here for this season. He's got 5 targets in the last 2 weeks as a player who we think should be a dominant pass-catching running back. In those 5 targets, again, this is 5 targets, not 5 receptions, Clyde has 2 touchdowns. You're talking about someone who has had 5 passes thrown to him and has turned 2 of those, which were inside the red zone, into touchdowns. But when it actually gets into nitty-gritty goal line carries, that's not what Clyde's being used for here. So to me, is this more of just a coincidence that he actually found the end zone on those catches and was elusive enough to make those plays happen? Because he is very capable of making plays. Or is this more of a product of him actually having consistent red zone production for the rest of the season? I'm going to say, watching the Chiefs over the last year and a quarter now, and having the sample size that we have for his actual goal line carries, that if you can get off of him and sell him high right now, it's not that you should be panicking and moving off of Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but if you can take him, maybe upsell him for an Austin Eckler. Now, that might be tough because he's been producing insane numbers lately. But if you can get out there and find a more certified and established RB1 player, there is no reason not to do that. No reason to hesitate. Make that move in a heartbeat. Again, not that you're panicking on Clyde right now, but if you can get something better than the situation you have right now, you go for it and you take that avenue with CEH as sell high value. Darnell Mooney for the Chicago Bears. Would you ever have believed you would see this? I thought I was going to have this a lot earlier on in the season, but we are going to buy Darnell Mooney right now. Who would have thought? When you get a quarterback in the game who can pass the ball deep, who's got some level of athleticism to break the pocket, and then has the poise to hang in and make a big throw, Darnell Mooney can be a dang productive receiver. He caught every single one of Justin Fields' passes in the first quarter last week and was excellent downfield. Darnell Mooney is going to be a consistent flex play for me the rest of the season in good matchups for the Bears because of his field stretching ability and the capability he has and has already shown to be one of Justin Fields' favorite targets when he's out there on the field. He's been named the starting quarterback for Chicago for the rest of this NFL season. That's a big boost to Mooney and Allen Robinson's fantasy value. This should start to take over here. Darnell Mooney saw an incredible amount of targets in a limited amount of starts last year. His production was very good, and the flashes he had were very nice in those games. I think he takes the next step this year. Justin Fields, the more he plays in this offense, the more comfortable he'll get, and the ceiling will continue to rise week over week for Mooney. Nick Chubb, obviously a top 12 running back right now, one of the most consistent performers and producers out there. But if you can sell him and the grass is greener for your league trade situation on the other side, I am going to. Nick Chubb has an awesome floor, but when he scores, or rather doesn't score touchdowns, the ceiling just is not there. He has become a player who will probably see 20-plus touches every single week, but the fact that he doesn't catch a single pass is limiting his numbers exponentially. It's stopping him from producing those freebie points that we see other pass-catching backs like Alvin Kamara, like an Austin Eckler or a DeAndre Swift thriving in this year. Chubb has had 22 rushes for 84 yards, 8 fantasy points. This past week, over 100, 10 fantasy points. He's not giving you an extra boost. And maybe for some situations, having that great floor is awesome. But if you need someone to take over for you and win your week's matchup, Nick Chubb just isn't that guy. He's the steady Eddie that just keeps plugging away. But for a player who is probably your first or early second round pick, the overall upside here is rather underwhelming. And we haven't seen those numbers since week 1 or 2 because he hasn't found the end zone since those games. Robert Woods, I'm going to buy this week, the 7th player up on the list. The gap isn't as big as you think. Cooper Kupp is not that much better of a player than Robert Woods. Sean McVay has expressed openly he wants to get Robert Woods the football more, and he wants to use him more in this offense. People are going to start double covering Cooper Kupp, and he had his first down week last week, and Robert was saved by a touchdown, but I expect his involvement to keep growing. Robert Woods is a player who can come out here and be one of the most consistent floor plays in fantasy football. He's the Nick Chubb of wide receivers, if you will, but his stock is so down right now that you can pick him up for cheaper than you usually would be able to, and if you can use him as a wide receiver 2 or flex in your lineups, that is a great service to have on your team. So go out, target Robert Woods this week. I'm a fan of him here. Marquise Brown, Hollywood Brown, and Butterfingers Brown. Those are the 3 names that you hear me call Hollywood on the channel. Now, it's not that I have anything against Marquise Brown. I believe in him as a player. I see with my eye test, he has made the jump. He separates more. He's explosive. He finds avenues downfield to get past and behind the last level of defense and make huge plays. He's got touchdowns in 3 of the 4 weeks this year. He should have touchdowns in each week this year, but hence the name Butterfingers Brown, he let some opportunities slip through his fingers. But the explanation and the reason I've got for selling Hollywood Brown this week is I believe that he's hit his fantasy ceiling and he has already peaked in the first month of the year. That's not something you want to have be the case for a player moving forward the rest of the year. Why do I think Hollywood has peaked? Rashad Bateman's return is imminent. He's going to be coming back onto the field, activated into the starting lineup, and if you think that the Ravens, who are incredibly good drafters, incredibly good scouting, they know personnel, and Rashad Bateman will get on the field right away. He was one of my favorite wide receivers in the 2021 draft class because of his separation ability, his route running, his savviness as a player. He is going to come in this offense and command targets, and that's just going to dilute the workload that everyone else has to share. That means less looks for Hollywood. That means another mouth is going to be fed and taking away some of his production. And while Hollywood is an awesome player, and while he's been giving us awesome, consistent, productive, dependable numbers, I think that those coming down just a little bit will hurt his value to your team in the long term. Sell him now while his numbers are sky high. Sell him while everyone is got him on the trending upwards arrow, and get a really nice return for him in the trade market, because I think that you can legitimately use him to pull some weight and get another solid player in return. So that's the case here for Hollywood Brown. Again, not looking to move off of him because I'm concerned about him as a player or don't believe in him. I just think it's hard for anyone when you introduce another significant weapon into an offense to continue producing at the rate that they currently are. Deebo Samuel. What a season it's been for him so far. I'm going to hold Deebo Samuel right now. It's going to be too hard for you to go out and buy him. His production has been off the roof, nuts, crazy, wild, all that good stuff. No one saw this coming. I mean, Deebo Samuel, amongst the fantasy community, myself included, was on the bust radar. This is a player that I was staying away from because I was on that Ayuk train and expecting him to come out here and him to be the guy blowing the brakes off defenses. How the roles and the tables have been turned here. Deebo has been a player I've been a huge fan of since he came in the league because I loved him as a run-after-catch asset, and in the wide receiver run game in his rookie season for San Fran, I thought he was awesome and dynamic in space. He almost reminded me, this is kind of weird to say because he's a wide receiver, but he almost reminded me a little bit of an extra explosive Le'Veon Bell, just in the way he carries the football and how he puts his shoulder down and plays so physically after the catch. That's besides the point. Deebo has come out here as a receiver, as a route runner, as a downfield pass catcher, and totally taken the jump. I mean, this was a player I expected to be better catching passes at the line of scrimmage and doing his damage after the catch, and he's now coming out here and being a field stretcher and doing other things that I never dreamed that Deebo Samuel will be used for in this Shanahan offense. The 49ers offense is like the great mystery of fantasy football. You never know what they're going to do. The reason I'm not selling Deebo either, because as someone who still has very legitimate concerns for his long-term usage, I don't know. I mean, the common sense situation for what I would say for Kyle Shanahan to do would be to distribute the ball around, get George Kittle involved. He's barely touching the football. Get Ayuk the ball more and spread this thing out a little bit more. That's never what Kyle Shanahan does. He's always got his own thing. He's always thinking he's the smartest guy in the room doing his job, which he probably is. So, I mean, obviously he gets to a Super Bowl and has all this great success as a coordinator. Dude's very good at his job. So, Deebo, I don't know what to expect for him going forward 100%. My instinct and my thought is that George Kittle and Ayuk are being severely underused right now, and that's going to change. But at the same time, you've been there. You've tried and broken down the running back situation for the 49ers. It's like impossible. You feel like you're just in an endless battle with yourself trying to figure out who's going to start. And when you think that, oh, it's Raheem Mostert's week, here comes JaMychal Hasty, and all of a sudden he's got 2 touchdowns, and you're like, what just happened? Or you're like, all right, now it's finally time. Jerick McKinnon, he's the only healthy running back. Oh, Jeff Wilson, 4 touchdowns. It's such a mystery to try and break down this 49ers offense. The production has been there. It's been quality. It's been more than quality. It's been elite. He's the number 3 wide receiver in fantasy football right now and amongst the top of the league in receiving yards. I think you just stick with it here. If you're a Deebo Samuel owner, there's no reason to panic, to sell high. He's getting the work, and history has shown with Kyle Shanahan, hence Raheem Mostert when he came in and just went buck wild for 200 plus and 4 TDs against the Packers. If you do this and have the hot hand, he's not going to stop feeding you the football. So I'm sticking with Deebo for now. I do, at the end of the day, think that George Kittle and Ayuk will see their roles expand at some point this season, but it is a headache trying to break down that San Francisco 49ers offense. And then finally here, Alvin Kamara. Kamara, I'm going to sell. You might think I'm crazy. Process that for a second. I'm selling Alvin Kamara if I have the chance. Now, let's put this into some context here before this gets taken out of hand and before we've got some upset listeners who are Alvin Kamara owners. Ask yourself this question. Has Alvin Kamara's ceiling been what you thought it would be this year? Has Alvin Kamara given you the return that you thought he would when you drafted him with, the 3rd, 4th, 5th pick in your draft? Because as an Alvin Kamara owner, someone who drafted him exclusively at the number 3 pick if I had the opportunity, or if he'd followed me at 4 or 5, I've been very disappointed. This offense, as expected, is very different than it was with Drew Brees under center. But unfortunately, the impact that that's had on Alvin Kamara has been a lot greater than I think I would have expected it to be either. 14 targets is all he has through the first month of the year without Drew Brees. 14 targets. To put that into context, Derrick Henry has more than him right now. Derrick Henry is being used more as a pass-catching weapon than Alvin Kamara is. One of the best pass catchers, running back, route runners, offensive weapons that we have in the game right now. A whole month of the season, we've got a quarter season sample size. He has 14 targets. That includes 0 in week 4. He's closer to Nick Chubb right now in terms of his pass catching volume and usage than he is to Derrick Henry, which makes no sense. When we've got an Austin Eckler who's going nuts, getting touchdowns, being used as a dynamic playmaking threat, when you've got Derrick Henrys who are catching passes now, and without his receivers on the field is the only hope and prayer that they have in that offense, there's better ceilings to be had elsewhere. Kamara's also had a couple ugly floor games, hence the New England Patriots matchup. He's also, this offense is just in general worse without Drew Brees on the field. You don't sell Alvin Kamara for nothing. You're not doing this out of desperation. But if you can methodically create a situation for yourself and a trade in your league where you can go pick up a better option, a better fantasy asset, maybe it's pairing Kamara with a wide receiver 2 and targeting a Derrick Henry. Maybe it's trying to sell him straight up for a player who has just been a better productive player than them so far this year, hence an Austin Eckler. I think you do that. It's crazy for me to say, and it feels crazy to say, but Alvin Kamara just has not lived up to expectations, and with a full month of the season in the book now, I think it's at least early, or it's late enough in this process where we can start saying this might be the legitimate future of what his role is in this Jameis Winston-led offense. Alrighty, that was my Week 5 trade advice for 2021 fantasy football. If you guys enjoyed today's video, make sure to give it a like and click that subscribe button if you are new around here. We're trying to grow that SFS community. Maybe we can get to 3K subs by the end of next week. That'd be awesome. We're still trying to grow here and make this an awesome, huge community to enjoy our fantasy games with on a weekly basis. So thank you to each and every single one of you that took the time to watch and are still watching today's video. I appreciate you all, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Peace out.